Casting Shadows, Book 5 of the Young Adult series Future Kings by Seth Gill. All rights reserved by Seth Gill. Read by Seth Gill. Chapter 1, Idyllic. Okay, class, pay attention up front. The substitute teacher stopped to stare around. Her clapped hands were held, as was her expectant gaze. I've been assured this material will be on the test next week. There were sneers and groans, and she smiled, motioning to the three blackboards set up at the front of the room before her. The six chalkboards hovered in different positions, waiting for their next words. The chalk hovering mid-sentence to the classroom's right not only hovered but leaned in as well. Who can tell me the date, and we're talking year here, the date of the new rise? Yes, she replied to a raised hand. Do you mean the new rise year or magical age year? The question relates to the new rise year, the teacher replied with a grin. At least, that's the date I have written down for me. And it makes sense, as we all know the new rise year was later adapted to the beginning and first year of the magical age as we've come to know and live it today. 2566? That is correct. The chalk that had been leaning in wrote the date in its place, then stopped and rested back in its hover like the rest. Angelina glared out from above her text. Who cared? She kind of looked forward to going to school, having grown up in an orphanage with little to no education, but this was just redundant. Who really cared when exactly the humans had turned on their wizard allies and tried to kill them? What good did it do knowing a specific year? There were so many dates and details of known history neatly written on those blackboards near to overflowing. What did any of it matter? And the new rise is important in our history as magicers, wizards, and mages alike. For what reason? The teacher asked. She opened her hands wide and glanced around looking for someone to answer her question. Angelina was wondering the same thing, so she made no effort to raise her hand or seem interested enough to be called upon. The teacher's robes were black with red striping along the collar and sleeves. They were well enough kept, but this teacher was a little overweight and the robes didn't hide much. The thinning blonde hair was near transparent. Angelina conceded she was nicer than their regular teacher, Master Zakine, but her skin was a little pasty. Angelina pulled on the back of her school uniform, customized navy blue cloak for a top, beige corded tie for a belt, and the navy blue thick cotton pants. The boots were comfortable leather, but the pants were heavy on a hot day, and the cloak top always set itself on a slant, making sitting more awkward than not. A 15-year-old raised his hand in the back. Angelina couldn't help but figure the seats were part of the problem. They were basically just molded wood. It marked the end of our dependence and alliance with the humans, the student noted with a wry nod. It was a true break from the old age and beginning of the new. Yes, it was, the teacher agreed. She raised a hand to stop a small conversation starting to one side. Knowing this date is also important because our roots began in the human world, which continues on its own course. If we deny our history, we deny our present. Who said that? There were vacant stares. Kane Farfnell, she noted with a frown. The leftmost chalk was scribbling furiously in the top left corner of the leftmost blackboard. He was one of the three chief wizarding members to begin the push for magical liberation before the Black Day. He was also instrumental in shaping the wizards and mages into a fighting force to help beat the Algonai down as the fight wore on. Kane Farfnell is a name you should all know. Yes, Angelina, I think it was. Isn't he the one who created the blending stones? The teacher just blinked. The blending stones that allowed the wizards to sneak up on the Algonai and kill them, Angelina pressed. The same blending stones the humans later used when they decided to turn on the wizards and try to kill them all? Well, yes. The teacher was clearly stunned. It occurred to Angelina she'd made no effort in learning this substitute's name. That isn't in the text, the teacher added with a slight inhale. Where did you learn all that? Angelina glanced at the rough-hewn parchment pages before her. There were 100 pages between those gray, leather-bound covers, and black print glistened on each page. Depending on what class they went to, the print changed to match the subject material. It provided what she figured was an unending slew of details about everything they'd never need to know. Dates were nothing. Moments and actions mattered. Direct to the point, this was the one thing she could contribute to the class. And it wasn't even mentioned within all that grand history? So deeds didn't matter to everyone? We discussed history on our trip here, she replied honestly enough. It must have come up then. The teacher slowly nodded. They discussed a little history at different points on their hike north. Angelina wasn't fully making that up. When they'd reached the mountains, they talked about how medieval wizards had crafted the sanctuaries and mountain domains the current wizards and mages inhabited ages later. The bit about Cain had been discussed a week prior in a private magic lesson she wasn't about to divulge, so the exact truth would have to go unspoken. Cain Farfnell did indeed create the blending stones, the teacher continued up front. Angelina noticed how the chalks weren't copying these details down. The blending stones were destroyed or have been lost since that day, though, so there's no fear of them causing us any further harm. Now, for next class. They're not all gone, Angelina countered. The teacher's stare was testy. The militia outside of Iroquois Falls had some they were using as we left. Angelina forged on whether this substitute liked being shown up or not. No teacher did, of course. At least she'd yet to meet one that didn't think they knew it all. They made us feel weird just being near them. Soft muttering began in places around the room, but the teacher's frown softened to a careful smile, and she motioned for silence. I'm sure you're referring to something else, she suggested, that smile becoming politely patronizing. There were many artifacts used back then that may have survived the ages. Angelina had the impression this teacher was trying to decide whether or not to punish her for speaking out of turn. Students weren't supposed to speak until spoken to or otherwise invited to speak. Another pointless rule in a sea of pointless rules. School was full of them. The teacher clearly decided to just move on instead of offering rebuke. The teacher swiveled her hand around, and the blackboards flipped around without turning. The bottoms merely lifted and the tops turned back at the same time. They rolled around, remaining in the same stationary place, revealing a perfectly blank and brushed clear blackboard surface on each of the three boards. For tomorrow, the teacher instructed, Master Zakeen should be back. You will be discussing our current history of the magical age that followed the new rise with the following points. The finding of the sanctuaries of old, the magical reinforcing of those same sanctuaries, the building of our social order that survives today, the founding of the first council of five. She paused to let the chalks catch up. They were each copying what she said in their section, along with 5 or 6 paragraphs she hadn't. You will need to know the names of Ain Ash and Carly Cole for tomorrow, she urged. Those chalks finally caught up, getting going again. They were originally friends with Cain Farfnell and continued his efforts, becoming 2 of those original members of the first Council of 5, seeing his dream of a true magical society through to completion. Angelina glanced at the light blue crystal resting on its black velvet bag on the right corner of her desktop. It was shimmering with the updated list of work to have done for tomorrow as the teacher spoke. Angelina didn't get why the chalk was necessary. The blackboards were getting filled every day, but the text had the same information, and the crystals took in their to-do lists. Why the duplication? School made no sense so often. According to his notes, you'll be covering up to the date when the talisman magic was developed, the teacher noted, one finger raised. So, you won't need to know beyond that. But the scope of this material isn't just names and dates. You've grown up knowing each other and all to some extent. It's the implications and meanings, the after effects of certain actions and lasting effects from key decisions made. Look beyond the names and dates when you study, she urged. And I do hope, and I'm sure he does expect, more participation tomorrow when he returns. Certainly more than I had here today. Like him, I'm sure, I do enjoy hearing other voices, not just my own. Angelina wasn't so sure about that. The teacher did like to go on. They all did. There was a soft gong, and the teacher clapped her hands together. The room lit up brighter, and students began to stand. Study for tomorrow, the teacher pleaded on. Otherwise, you won't know the material, and you will lose marks on the test. It's a proven fact. There were nods and grunts, and students started filing from the room while the teacher turned, speaking soft words. The boards began clearing up on both sides as the boards flipped unmoving once again. What does she normally teach anyway? 3rd semester history. I've heard she never lets you leave without at least 5 hours of homework and study in her regular class. I guess this is a bit of a step down for her. Master Zakeen would never have let that go. He's not here, is he? But he'll hear about it. Angelina watched the students pass. They were making a clear effort to avoid looking at her. She stuffed her main book and 2 smaller notebooks she rarely ever used into her school bag and stood. The students more directly around her kept leaving but gave her more space in the effort. She looped the bag's shoulder strap over her back and shrugged, making sure neither the bag nor strap caught her long brown hair which she had been letting grow. They wanted to give her space? So be it. She clearly should have burned through a few more school bags sooner. She'd only done it once, and he deserved it. Elbowing and teasing her like he had. He was lucky she hadn't done worse. It seemed reputations weren't that hard to forge after all, like she'd been warned, or had Starben been expecting she'd make the good kind. It wasn't her problem if they couldn't handle a 15-year-old with an attitude. Some redheads only learned that after a good burning. And let Zucchine take offense with her knowing history facts that weren't in the book. What was that to her? She scooped up and bagged her memory crystal and left after the others. She'd hate to miss the next class. Such wonders surely abound. The corridor was packed with students from first to fifth semester, all pushing and rushing along in groups and alone. They were mostly in pairs and larger groups. Angelina sighed and pushed through along the right wall. The light brown wood paneling was nice. Stone rune blocks were mounted in the walls every couple of feet, making the small torches burn safely. And small silver crystals were fitted into black wall slots just above the molded baseboard to regulate heat. She had been told that much on the guided tour they'd given her the first day. A fragrant smell came from the paintings mounted at head height. It was, of course, competing with the sweaty teens, preteens, and general BO. Spells were cast into the frames and oils to clear and scent the air. Some days not even those spells did the work, but today the nose wasn't too offended by the passing traffic. Angelina paused by one of the school's many bay windows with its deep inset and inviting view. The sky was clear. The countryside beyond the school's stone ramparts called to her. A second soft gong told her she had to keep going. When students were late to class, they got automatic detention. They got more time to sit and listen to lectures that didn't really go anywhere. She arrived just under the final gong and slipped in the back of the class. It was another lecture hall like the last. This one only had one blackboard, mind you. Only the practical spellcasting classrooms had stages and rooms to stand and move about. Be seated, this teacher called from down in front. We have a full class today, so we need to begin. Books out and crystals up front. Like everyone else, Angelina laid her books out. She recognized the magical sheen to her main large text as the words contained within emptied, instantly refilling with 100 pages of reference information to do with magic ethics. Angelina set her study crystal out upon its velvet bag where the teachers always wanted it. Professor Jove was no different. Angelina hated being a sheep. Magic ethics, Professor Jove continued from behind her podium. That's the name of the class as you all know it, and it's the reason you're all here, to learn what's involved in being magically ethical in our conduct. What does that mean? There were snickers and rolled eyes. Now, I know I've asked the same question every class, Jove conceded, holding up a hand for silence. And here I am asking it again. But there's a reason I keep asking you. She licked her lips and smiled. I keep getting the wrong answers. A general rolling laugh was heard. Angelina was still waiting for the point. So what does it mean, Jove pressed, staring the students down in different spots around the class? What does it mean to be practically ethical? We're sitting here day after day discussing rule sets and age limitations. I keep trying to drive the meaning home and apply what you're learning in other classes to the ethical basis behind all the above. But am I getting through? Anyone, please. Sharon, answer if you would. The professor's expectant roving gaze and stiff walk across the stage made it clear someone would have to answer her question whether they wanted to speak up or not. A volunteer would undoubtedly be selected if no one came forward on their own. Angelina had already had her fun speaking up in history, so she left this one for someone else, hoping she wouldn't be picked on to be the forced volunteer. It's choosing whether it's right to use your magic in any given situation, an 11-year-old tried down left. Professor Jove smiled wide, turning to face that student. Yes, it is, but how do we define that base definition? If you're threatened, let's say, if someone's bothering you, if you feel you need to strike back, what is the governing ethic involved? How do we decide what magic to use in each given situation? How do we decide what is right and when? She glanced around, hoping someone else would reply before staring at the original student again and prompting her for more words. The student adjusted how she sat and cleared her throat. Using self-control was the weak attempt. Jove shrugged and glanced around. A good base suggestion, but let's see if we can come up with something more concrete today, shall we? Angelina settled in for another fun lecture. They covered the same themes every day. Using magic only when necessary, only as much magic as necessary, never relying on magic to solve their problems, and practicing respect for everyone around them. Knowing magic didn't make them better or stronger or more deserving than anyone else. They were just like everyone else and needed to carry themselves with the same respect they wanted to receive from other people. The use of magic was just one piece of the package and needed to be treated with a careful hand. They heard it every day and gave the same answers and reasoning back at her. Exact examples and discussion topics changed, but that was about it. Professor Jove just kept digging at the same holes, trying to get more of something from them. Angelina really didn't know what exactly she wanted more of. By the generally blank stares around her, no one else got the point either. They actually think none of us have used magic before, a 16-year-old was joking upon release. The class emptied out behind him, Angelina included. What, we haven't heard all these speeches about proper use of magic from our parents time and time again? Some haven't, his friend a year younger insisted. There's a 10-year-old in my runes history class that still hasn't mastered fire. They shared a derisive snort. Noticing Angelina coming up behind them, they walked on, pushing into the crowd. She shook her head and pressed on in the other direction. She was headed to runes history. Just her luck. It was still weird to her how there were 3 or 4 of each class, each with different teachers. First semester students weren't all at the same age or skill level. Some students had known and understood magic for years, but they hadn't shown the ability to cast and use it, so they'd been left to their own devices. Other students developed magical skill early at 9 or 10. With admittance based on magical gifts, not age, classes were a mishmash of each. Angelina had been wondering why there wasn't a class on student ethics. How to treat your fellow students with respect, no matter how old or skilled they were. That was a class she'd like to attend. In the least, it was sorely missed. She passed one of the student lounges set into the wall with its lit fireplace and surrounding couches, chairs, and tables. Students not heading off to the next class gathered and joked. A few glanced up and followed her with their eyes. Some of those gazes weren't offensive, but a few were more judgmental than not. Word of her having come north with Starbin had carried its own reputation after she'd chosen to move in from the countryside and sign up at the school. She hadn't originally realized how much of a hermit and undesirable Starbin had become to the modern magic world, at least to this particular part of society. She had learned how little most teachers and students thought of him soon after starting classes. Her current difficulty at making friends wasn't all her undoing. She'd reminded Starbin of this fact the last time they'd spoken. He hadn't found a rebuke, just a quick change of topic. Everyone stopped as the soft gong stayed going longer than normal. Study crystals were fished out of pockets and velvet bags. Angelina gripped hers and closed her eyes, and the usual misty magical shroud descended around her. It was like she was part of a shared meditation every time she used the study crystal. Only there was no Gordon, Simon, or Starbin present, and the only magic being used was for homework, not pleasure. In that magical world cast from within the crystal, she found herself standing in a medium-sized room. The floor, walls, and desk were light silver, and the wooden pegboard and background shelving bore a metallic coat. There were stacks of file folders on the desk from magical applications. Oh, those definitions to be memorized. On the other corner were more recent history reminders with twice as many folders in a small tin. When homework was left too long, it usually melted into a single reminder note to speak to the professor. That wasn't a good thing. The small tin sounded warnings before that note needed to be left. The shelves were full of books, each neatly labeled in its own color. The pegboard was pegged to death with pictures and charts her teachers wanted her to look over. Most of the work on the pegboard was about 2 weeks old. The shelves were older. She usually got to the desk first, but not always. Anything could be opened and studied inside that magical sphere. Anything physical still had to be built and brought to class, but most work was mental, like the teachers. The one difference this time in was a note pegged top right. It had a golden glow marking how newly posted it was. She pulled it off and read. Classes are called off this afternoon, she mumbled. No argument there. She read on. Workshops are being posted in town for us to look through. She shrugged. They're giving me the afternoon off. I can give the postings a glance over. She doubted there'd be anything good, but it was an excuse to get outside and away from more homework. How could that be a bad thing? She pulled out from the crystal's projection and shook her head. The school's magic always left her head feeling a little fuzzy. Everyone was already headed for dorms and rooms to discard their books. Angelina figured the halls would be so packed that doing the same was a waste. May as well just carry the books with me, she reasoned. They aren't that heavy. Slipping the study crystal back in its bag in her pocket, she slipped through the crowd, breaking left when most people turned right. She crossed out from the wooden torchlit walls over the thicker, chunkier wooden bridge. She headed out over the moat that flowed beneath, out into the light of day, and gazed upon the basically medieval town of Cormac in the distance. BC, AD, NRMA, whatever age acronyms they wanted to use, she really was lost in time anymore. The castle school, vast countryside, and expansive vistas were all held inside an immense underground magical and domed sanctuary set under a large North Arctic mountain, with no hint of snow or cold anywhere to be found. It was such a weird existence that it sometimes didn't seem real, and it was sometimes too much to deal with. Today, she shrugged it off. Today, she had the afternoon off. So she took all the weirdness in stride and followed along with the surging crowd.